I started doing what you guys are doing. I was editor of my university newspaper at the University of Toronto, which is a big school, big public school like Rutgers. So it's a big job I was features editor, and then I was editor-in-chief, and then I got an internship at our national newspaper in Canada, the Globe and Mail, and then there was an election, and so then I stayed, and then I just kind of got sucked in. I edited a small progressive magazine in Canada for a couple of years, and then decided to go back to school, and I was still doing journalism. I had a column in a daily newspaper in Canada called the Toronto Star, and I was still freelancing. And when I returned to school, and that would have been like 1995, 96, I really noticed a big change from when I had been there just a few years earlier in the campus body. There was a lot more focus on the power of multinational corporations and what they were doing on university campuses, sponsorship deals, the working conditions of the clothing that our campus, our university was selling. So it was the beginning of the anti-sweatshop movement. And so I found it really interesting because when I was in school, we had really been focused on governments as the site of political change, and there seemed to be a new generation of student organizers who were focused on corporations as the space of political change. And so I decided to write a few articles about that, and then I thought, well, there's more than just an article here, there's really a book. And so that's when I decided to leave school and write my first book, which was No Logo. I wrote it in my 20s. And it came out at the end of 1999, so it's been 20 years, or almost 20 years, since No Logo came out. So I think the first semester that I was at Rutgers, this past semester, I spent a lot of time just trying to figure out this huge institution and meeting with lots of different people and kind of mapping who's here and who wants to collaborate and work together, and also designing my first course. So I'm teaching my first course through Sky, but it's also open to students in women and gender studies. And it's called The Corporate Self, and it's a new course. It's one I designed sort of from scratch because it's very much new material that's looking at the integration of the corporation and the self. So it begins with material that I covered in No Logo, but it goes to books that are just coming out now, like The Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff, and it's looking at the self now as this frontier for a new kind of capitalism that is about mining personal data, surveilling relationships, and influencing personal behavior. So rather than just looking at this as a tech issue, we're really looking at it as a sort of political economy issue and looking at parallels between earlier stages of capitalism where something that was never seen as being a product, never seen as being commodifiable or market, was enclosed and turned into a market. So the first thing we look at is the enclosure of British lands in the 17th and 18th century. Then going into the colonial period, the selling of bodies, and really following that through to the neoliberal period and the enclosure of many public institutions, universities, libraries, and ending with this idea of the enclosure of our very selves, of our most intimate relationships, and that being turned into a commodity through a combination of this extractive business model and new technologies. I think one of the students said, I'd rather see ads for clothes I actually want to buy than clothes, for like somebody with a completely different body type, And so there's definitely a sense that the stakes of this web of surveillance and extraction that is being normalized right now are really, really low. But what's very worrying is when you think about what is possible when these incredibly powerful surveillance technologies are in the hands of governments that don't believe in democracy, are interested in controlling their populations. And we are seeing this. We're seeing a very different use of these very same technologies in countries like China, India. Modi's government is kind of trying to get rid of cash, and so every single transaction is through this sort of one ID card. You have China in the middle of a social experiment that's a lot like an episode of Black Mirror, where people are given ranking based on whether they're supposedly a good citizen or not, based on this kind of surveillance. And we already know that these many U.S.-based companies have been working with the Chinese government for a long time to have technologies that we use every day used in China to identify people who are saying things online that the Chinese government doesn't like, to locate those people, arrest those people, and jail them. I don't think it's becoming less globalized, and I don't think that I think there have always been a sort of marginal group of voices that were interested in a really protectionist response to climate change. The debates that I was a part of were really about what should the rules be that govern the way we globalize, because we've been global for a long time. And so the critique of the so-called anti-globalization movement was not a critique of internationalism, was not even a critique of most forms of economic integration, but it was saying that these rules are being written to benefit very large players at the expense of everybody else, and predicted that they would lead to a much deeper wealth stratification that we've in fact seen. So it was really a movement against the globalization of Reaganomics. It was against the globalization of this idea that if we privatize everything and deregulate in the interests of corporations and cut taxes for the wealthy and pay for it by cutting social services, that good things are going to happen for everyone. And so I think that we are still global, and I think that we have a lot of anger because indeed these rules have not benefited the vast majority of people, and we have seen that wealth stratification. And I think that we have some people who are saying, we have to direct that anger at the people who wrote the rules and profited enormously from those rules. And I would put Bernie in that camp. I would put, Jeremy Corbyn in that camp, and his, for the many, not the few. But understandably, elites are frantically trying to redirect that rage at someone else. And that is what the scapegoating of immigrants is about in this country, in Europe, in Australia. It is ultimately about elite deflection. And I hope that we're able to have a real debate about that in the 2020 election cycle, because I do think that part of what is going to happen in the context of climate change, and I think people understand this, is that more and more people are going to have to move. We've already locked in enough warming that there's going to be a huge amount of mass migration. We already have more people on the move than at any point in human history. And I think even people who deny climate change on some level know that. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that we are seeing a sort of a locking down and a rising of xenophobia in Europe and Australia and in the United States, even if if the people who are propagating this claim to deny climate change. I think they understand it very well. The good news is that there is a broader spectrum of debate, that we are finally talking about responses to climate change that I believe are enormously popular, right? The problem with the approach to climate change that we've had now for a couple of decades is that we tried to carve out climate change as just being about carbon. So the response has been, well, let's just put a price on carbon, let's have cap and trade, which we have in some states, or let's have a petroleum tax like Emmanuel Macron introduced in France, and lo and behold, you have an uprising. Because if you have great economic inequality and your response to climate change is to give wealthy people tax cuts and tell poor people and regular working class people and middle class people that they have to bear the entire burden themselves, that they have to have higher electricity costs, higher gas costs, then they are going to reject that. And we've seen this in many places that have had unjust responses to climate change, unjust climate policies. That's what I mean, that if we don't design for justice, which is what the Green New Deal is about, we will get climate injustice. And if we have climate injustice, we simply won't have climate action. That's what we've seen in France with the uprising, the Yellow Vest movement. They rejected it and managed to reverse it. And I think that was entirely predictable. And we've seen this in Canada with provinces that have introduced unjust climate policies that increase people's electricity rates. They elect right-wing populists and they reverse it. So, I think climate justice is the right approach, not just because it's just, but because I think it's the best chance of actually getting popular support.